All right, so we are excited to kick off our fireside chat on advancing cancer care through microbiome profiling. Joining me is Dr. Barbara Sladek, Managing Director at Biome Diagnostics.
Hello, everybody. It's very exciting meeting you. I'm going to share my screen now, and I hope you will see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you what we can actually nowadays already do by looking at the microbiome. I will go one step back and very quickly introduce the microbiome, the intestinal microbiome, and why it's so amazing and important. Tell you our solution, and then give you concrete examples how we actually can revolutionize the entire healthcare sector by using the intestinal microbiome. So let me kick off by basically saying that the intestinal microbiome combines these 39 billion bacteria that are just living in our gut system. And they play a huge role, actually, how healthy we are, how unhealthy we are, and especially also how we respond to therapy. Over the last few years, what was actually even said is that the gut microbiome is the superorgan without which we actually are not able to live. So did you, for example, know that over 70% of your immune system sits and exists in your gut and is responsible for allergies, for how you react to autoimmune diseases, etc. Even direct links were found between diseases such as Perkins and Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression, and more obvious things like diabetes or cancer. And today, I would also like to highlight the cancer case to you. But before that, let me introduce our solution to you. So you can imagine, as I said, you have these 39 billion bacteria just living in your gut, including as well viruses and fungi. But we will concentrate on the gut microbial or bacterial microbiome because it's the largest, because it's over 95% of the entire microbiome that is decided by the gut bacteria. And so far, we know about 1,500 different kinds of bacteria living in the gut. And what they can also do, they can also switch functions. So one of the most important things you can consider, or you can think of when you're looking at the microbiome, is that you actually have a big data issue. And that to analyze these gut bacteria, you require AI and a decent amount of data science and statistical information to be able to verify that. What we have done now is we usually work with stool samples. We use the most modern technologies based on next generation sequencing. We can work with whole genome sequencing, with 16S genome sequencing, whatever. Our core competence is the AI and the data science that we require to analyze gut microbial samples properly. We require one standardized stool sample. And obviously, the other very important thing, to be frank, it's a little bit European. We have a very strong quality management in place, and the entire company are organized under 2 ISO certifications for developing medical diagnostic products. And we are CIVD marked, meaning that is very similar to the FDA approval in the US, where it means that you're allowed to sell your products for medical diagnostic purposes. The way how we build our solution is that it fits everything, and that you have one solution which is scalable around the entire world with one process, even though you might have different questions or different questions are answered. Meaning you order a test, it gets shipped, you take a stool sample, you do the sequencing wherever you want. We do the identification of the bacteria and the deep tech analysis, and then we create one report. As said, the nice thing about the microbiome is non-invasive, it's standardized. You only need one sample for many solutions, and you can use it for quite a lot of diseases. With our available products with Biome, we're European market leaders. I'm going to get to that later on. And with Biome 1, which is our focus now, we can look at immunotherapy, and Biome CRC, we can actually tackle colorectal cancer. With our products and our partnerships, we were able to create one of the largest databases of microbiome samples across the world. This is actually crucial because only with that kind of amount of data, we were able to tackle problems. The first problem I would like to introduce you to is cancer in general, or actually immunotherapy. Cancer immunotherapy is the growing therapy for cancer that you have currently. But the issue with immunotherapy is that actually over 80% of cancer patients are non-responders. They're either non-responding or they suffer from so severe side effects that the therapy is not kicking in. What we have developed by looking at the microbiome is actually a product called Biome 1, which allows you to predict the analysis or the response to cancer immunotherapy before you start the therapy. And that's really cool because like that, it is possible that you personalize the cancer therapy and you can say exactly beforehand which therapy will work for which person. And also you can vary the doses accordingly. It is also the very first CE-IVD marked product, so FDA, very similar to FDA approval, that allows to be used in a medical setting and is based on AI and the microbiome. The sensitivity is quite high with over 94% of accuracy, and it's already on the market since November 2022 and generates revenue. So everything we do is focused on also helping people as soon as possible and getting onto the market as soon as possible. The second problem, or the second product I would like to introduce you now to, is Biome CRC. With Biome CRC colorectal cancer screening, it is possible to screen not only for colorectal cancer, but also for adenoma, so any kind of pre-stage of colorectal cancer, meaning that even before one will have colorectal cancer, it is possible to identify and then change, because colorectal cancer, as you know, is one of these very few and rare cancers where you currently actually don't even need to die anymore from, because you just can cut out the piece of gut if you need or if it's required. Also, this is already available, and the accuracy is decently high. We do have a very large platform, which allows also to go for other products. So Biome FMT for fecal microbiome transplantation, which is one of the coolest and most amazing things for me, because what you do is you change the gut microbiome of, for example, a person that is sick. And like that, you can change the entire immune system of a person. You can change how people will respond to treatment and how to, and you can even cure diseases like that. The first trials are already made in the area of Perkins and dementia, and they're very, very promising. And you can imagine it's really cool because you just need to take a capsule or you get a colonoscopy and that's it. But nothing would be possible actually without having strong partnerships and top-tier partners that help, on the one hand, to validate the tech, and obviously also on the other hand, to distribute the products and to get things moving. Our business model is actually quite easy. We have one platform, we have one system, everything is streamlined, even though the customer groups sometimes change between healthcare providers, pharmaceuticals, and customers. And obviously the way what we also have are white label solutions, meaning that we can brand, and we also brand any kind of technology that we have under a different brand. And as you know as well, the market is rising. We do have a top-notch team. It's decently small still, with 19 people only. But I think it's quite cool. We won last year and this year already the Web Summit, the public voting. We are now the finalists at ET Catapult and at the MedTech Innovator, which is currently running. And we also won the Ernst & Young Scale-Up Award last year. And my background, just very briefly, I did my PhD in Oxford, then came back and learned diagnostic business in Siemens Healthineers, and also learned that even though perhaps some people think that there is no money in the diagnostic world, well, it really is in the molecular diagnostic world. And Nikolaus, my co-founder, he's a doctor by training, and he was also named Forbes 30 Under 30. We do generate revenue as well, obviously. We generated over 6 million of liquidity as well over the last few years. We are in the market since 2019, starting with our product, Biome, and then continuing to others. And finally, where is the journey going? Well, obviously, currently this year, we're going to focus on Europe and then on the US market. And one of the biggest things we are now working on is the integration into Illumina and also the Mayo clinics, where we have a very strong cooperation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Barbara. I appreciate that for that presentation. One of the comments you made was this notion of difference between diagnostics versus molecular diagnostics. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more for those that are watching.
Mm-hmm. So, well, one of the first things that you might know is diagnostic, the business you might consider as is blood diagnostics. So when you go to the laboratory and some blood is taken and the levels of vitamin D or ferron is measured, these parameters are really cheap. They cost a few cents, and that's it. But when it comes to the area of molecular diagnostics, you start usually at the price per test by over 1,000 euros. And even though the margin is actually quite high, because as you saw in our case, actually sequencing, as some of you might know, is getting cheaper and cheaper. So COGS for sequencing are usually about 50 euros. And the rest is margin, and that's quite nice.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Now, for those investors that are looking within the category of longevity, they're looking at lots of different areas, like I mentioned before, tissue organ growth and transplantation, gene editing, gene therapy, senescent cells, and it just goes on and on. Why should intestinal microbiome be part of that holistic strategy for addressing longevity issues?
So it's actually, thank you for this amazing question. So it's actually really interesting that the microbiome changes over time. And it also requires different things that one eats. So for example, older people cannot process vegetables and fruits and salads that well as, for example, when you're below 60 or between 20 and 60, something like this. And it was already shown that like these diseases elderly people usually have, like dementia, Perkins, Alzheimer, is directly linked. And the nice thing is that by changing the microbiome, by changing the diet, you can prolong the years of actually healthy living. And I think that is really nice. And if you go one step forward, and say, well, actually, some people have a very hectic life and perhaps cannot properly care about their gut system currently, well, you can just change it by using FMT, fecal microbiome transplantation. And this technology is actually very powerful.
So this general area is very exciting, but at the same time, from a social media and mainstream side, it's also very subject to, let's call it misinformation or even disinformation, with the supplement industry potentially pushing things that may or may not necessarily work. Any comments there?
I agree that the marketing you can do around probiotics and the misinformation is ridiculously large currently. Our approach currently is that we work a lot with universities, with large companies, that everything we do is scientifically proven. And that is actually the crucial thing, that you try to stay as close to science and research as possible and use the information that is out there and not basically overdo the marketing. And currently, this approach is working for us quite well.
Terrific. I'm very glad to hear that. Can you share a little bit of best practices and guidance on prebiotics and probiotics for gut health?
So prebiotics are everything that is, for example, fermented, any kind of food or supplements you take in that are not dried bacteria or something like this. Probiotics are, and I'm sorry to say, these prebiotics to take, or also supplements like magnesium, etc., that's really good for one's body and to basically support the body. Probiotics might be a little bit more tricky, because actually the scientific evidences for probiotics are really very, very limited, and one has to be quite careful what to take and how to consider probiotics. So you won't find any kind of proper literature showing that probiotics actually help when taking at the same time as antibiotics, or you won't find any proper literature when it comes to probiotics and cancer. Sometimes, obviously, it can help. It's this placebo effect, you might know. But in general, prebiotics are actually quite good, and everything you can take regarding that one.
Great, thank you. There's a question on live stream, and this person is asking, are you seeking FDA approval? Have you worked with U.S. insurance providers?
Yes, we are seeking FDA approval. We're working on that. The amazing thing for us is that we actually found out a few weeks ago that we don't require another study, because we've done a decent amount of studies so far, to actually enter the US market and to seek and get FDA approval. We expect to receive FDA approval within the next 9 to 10 months. And we are in contact with US insurances. To be frank, it's not that easy to get into the proper insurance system, but we are working on that. And as said, we're working with a large hospital group such as Mayo Clinic's LabCorp to actually also enter properly the US market.
And just to make sure that the question is contextualized properly, is we're talking about FDA for diagnostic tools, not for therapeutics, correct?
Yes, that's the very nice thing, that even though that the microbiome itself, and also that might be crucial, FMT, so fecal microbiome transplantation, is considered to be a medical device, so medical product, and does not belong under drug discovery or drug development or pharmaceutical approval. And like that, it's actually not so difficult to receive.
So let me go back to oncology, and I want to ask you, how prevalent is consideration of intestinal microbiome in the study, treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of tumors?
So when it comes to treatment, it's actually interesting, because the link between especially immunotherapy and cancer and the gut microbiome is really huge, because you can imagine that the immune system sits to 70 or plus 70% in the gut. And by changing the gut, one also changes additionally the way how you react to an immunotherapy, because the immunotherapy, as you know, is directed to the immune system. And this link is really nice. And that is the reason why, by looking at the intestinal microbiome, it can be a one-to-one analysis and association between the intestinal microbiome and treatment. When it comes to prevention and proper screening methods for cancer, well, obviously, the link between the gut microbiome and the tumors there are only linked to the tumors sitting in the gut. So anything like colorectal cancer, colorectal tumors, stomach tumors, liver tumors, kidney tumors, etc. There you can find also very strong link.
Mm-hmm. Now, from a process, how do we ensure that biome diagnostics is a mandatory pre-step before initiating cancer therapy?
I find that a very tricky question, because we realized that you need quite a lot of different kind of players to agree. You, on the one hand, need to educate the end customers and the doctors. And educating the doctors is actually really, well, it takes usually about 20 years from something that is discovered until it gets into the medical books and that the new generation of doctors learns it. And 20 years, can you imagine? That's really long. So the idea is to basically overcome this way by offering additional information to them. And some doctors are actually very open to that. You also have to tackle the end customers to influence, or the patients to influence the doctors. You need the healthcare providers on board to make certain that that works. And ideally, that is where we're working on now as well, is you need to have the large corporation partners like Roche and Siemens, Illumina, etc., Bristol Myers, to have this thing. I know it sounds complex, but we are actually working on that since 4 years, and the progress is actually quite good.
Great. So speaking of behavioral change management and even perception, let's talk a little bit about some of the solutions that you were talking about, if in case someone's gut health isn't quite optimal before, let's say, cancer treatment. And it suggests a fecal microbiota transplantation to be able to then infuse a healthy human donor feces into that patient. But I wonder if you could talk about what's the kind of patient education as well as behavioral change that's needed for mainstream to accept and to adopt.
So the first thing I would say is that you require people to see the gut, see stool, as something that is actually good and that is helpful. And that also everything in the bowel is something that is living and that is like a super organ that decides on how we feel. And that bacteria are something positive, and that we just have a very few pathogenics, but in general that it's good and that it is all right to talk about it. One thing I find a very positive development is that for FMT, for example, one requires to only take a few capsules. That doesn't sound so bad as if you say, well, you need to undergo a colonoscopy and you get the poo of somebody else in your gut system. But just taking some pills, I think, sounds far more acceptable. So I see that this is actually a very good movement into that direction to be able to facilitate that. The other thing that one obviously can do as well is there are quite a few studies out there already, and we're working, for example, together with the University of Wisconsin, where they showed that also training and sport helps to change the gut microbiome, and like that you actually can influence how one will respond to a cancer treatment. So one has the possibility to influence the gut microbiome to make a better response to a therapy, even without FMT.
Thank you for that. So I think before this session, I had shared with you that I recently had to go through a colonoscopy, which I did not enjoy. And for those that initially go through it, it's, again, not very pleasant. And then the thing is, there's a gap of potentially 5, but more usually 10 years before someone else has to go through another colonoscopy again. That's a long time. And given the fact that it's one of those areas where you can definitely prevent those cancers, how could Biome CRC, one of your products, disrupt the colonoscopy industry?
So the nice thing about Biome CRC is that the accuracy is decently high with over 95%, which is actually really good. Actually, it's even now between 96 and 97%. And having this accuracy means that you just have to take a stool sample, send it to us, and you in between get the results of whether there is a likelihood of having adenoma, which is far more important than already. So knowing that you have one of the pre-stages of colorectal cancer, than actually having colorectal cancer, because that is something you more likely will notice. And it's what is also crucial and very important for us is that one does not, well, the way how we see it is that obviously if something is happening, one still has to undergo colonoscopy to basically validate it and perhaps cut something out and to make certain that it works. But it helps in between to make certain that one does not develop any kind of colorectal cancer in stages beforehand. And I think that is actually nice.
Well, I can't wait for it to be available in the US. Now, I'm going to ask a very important question, and I think we've been alluding to it, but I want to ask it very straightforward, which is, as a business strategy, your organization, and really it's more of a holding group, has chosen to start out with diagnostics rather than going to market with therapeutic solutions. Talk to us about the advantages of that, but also some of the lessons learned from others that have gone to market with therapeutics first.
So when we want to do something, we want to do it properly, and we want to make certain every startup has a high risk affinity, obviously, but we try to keep this risk to a minimum. And what we realized from the very beginning onwards was that before going into the therapeutic sector, we have to understand the microbiome properly to not promise or overpromise something that we cannot deliver. And we used Biome, our lifestyle brand, to gather data that worked amazingly well, and to try to understand the microbiome, and to also have one of the largest healthy groups of microbiome samples. And that's actually quite crucial, because you have to know how a healthy microbiome looks like so that you then can distinguish between a sick and healthy microbiome sample. Because, as said beforehand, it's very similar, you and I, or everybody, or hopefully everybody who is listening, all of us look different, but hopefully most of us or all of us are also healthy. And it's very similar to the microbiome. Even though microbiome samples look different, have different distributions between different bacteria kinds, they're all healthy. And finding this balance and understanding what healthy means is actually really crucial. So that was the first step. The second step was then to say, well, let's try to develop proper medical diagnostic products in terms that are used in the hospitals by the doctors, that are labeled with a CIVD mark or FDA approval or whatever. That's going through this regulatory process was actually really tricky to get the validation studies done and everything. Now we also have a process so that we can actually do it for any kind of product, any kind of disease we want. There is no stopping us anymore whether we want to develop an Alzheimer product or a cancer product or whatever, because we know the process. That was the second step. The third step now is, I was already talking about FMT, is to use FMT to actually be able to use it as a therapeutics. And that is also that we're working on now. And by having this entire ladder, we actually also know how to be successful.
Great, thank you for that. Now, there was a slide that you mentioned around revenue. I wonder if you could just go a little bit more in depth in terms of attribution to the different products, and as a holding group, where things are headed as far as the remainder of this year, but certainly next year.
Mm-hmm. So we see the biggest leverage so far in Biome 1 for actually being able to identify who's going to be a good responder to any kind of immunotherapy. The reason for that is because the number of immunotherapy patients is rising like crazy. And that actually helps us because, so the way how we, sorry, to go a step backwards, the way how we decided to approach business and business cases is that we said, okay, making business is hard enough anyways. So we want to be as well always on the wave upstream when businesses are growing, when markets are growing. And that was also the reason why we decided for the cancer market because unfortunately, cancer is the rising disease. And for cancer treatment, as you know, most people also unfortunately require treatments, and knowing beforehand who's able to respond to treatment, what's the best treatment for a person, that's like something that's a no-brainer, right? And that's the reason why we see as the biggest driver for us is Biome 1, followed then also by Biome CRC, colorectal cancer screening. But it's more difficult to actually get into the market with a screening test.
Great. Well, I want to thank Dr. Sladek for a terrific conversation on intestinal microbiome. Please give her a round of applause. We're now going to transition to our AI and robotics and autonomy track.